To be honest, I was hopeful when they pulled me out of that pit. Sure, back then I sounded boastful and probably deserved to take a hit. But this, brothers betraying brother, even if I'm from another mother, this should not be. They stripped me of my clothes and wanted me dead. But traders came, and I was sold for shekels instead. Just like that, I became a slave that was sold. Sold to Egyptian land at 17 years old. We got to Egypt, and I was sold once again. Sold for a higher value by Ishmaelite men. To Potiphar, the captain of the guard. His job was to keep Pharaoh safe as officer in charge. Even though I was bought like a household item, of all people I could have ended up with, God put me with him. Before I was a slave, I was a son. To Jacob called Israel as his favorite one. I joyfully received my father's technicolor coat, but then it got tainted by the blood of a kid goat. From son to slave, my outer garments changed, yet stripped of my clothes, whom I serve stayed the same. My God's reputation always preceded me. The success of my slave work was Egyptian reality. Potiphar's trust in me grew year after year. He even put me in charge as the head overseer. I was given authority over his entire household, except of course his wife he should withhold. I was honored to even be in this position. I didn't sign up for it. All it took was submission. Surrendering trust to the only king was the only reason I had left for living. Here's yet another story, comprised of God's faithfulness and man's accusatory lies. The slippery slope showed up during daytime, when to her, it seemed like I was on the climb, on the slave ladder of success. Potiphar's wife began to boldly express her affections towards me. It happened once, it happened twice. Day after day, I'd deny her thrice. Slavery's wrong, but for me, this was worse. I could never betray Potiphar. It's just absurd. It wasn't even about the idea of getting caught. It was more that I just couldn't bear the thought of rebelling against my Lord and my God. He's the real king, the real master of my life. It wasn't worth the stake with Potiphar's wife. And so I ran. She kept my garment in her hand, but I didn't look back. I just ran and ran. Before I was a slave, I was a son. Now I'm a successful slave, but I'm on the run, running from undesirable temptation, falling into the hands of false accusation associated wrongly with my Hebrew reputation. I wasn't even warranted a proper investigation. From son to slave, my outer garments changed, but this time, my slave garments led me to chains. Yet, even now, whom I serve remains the same. My God's reputation always preceded me. The success of my prison work was, once again, Egyptian reality. The prison guards trust in me grew year after year, until once again, I became the prison overseer. I was honored to be in this position. I didn't sign up for it. All it took was submission. Surrendering trust to the only king was once again the only reason for my living. I was known as a son. I was known as a slave. I'm now known as a prisoner. But I remain unafraid. Abandoned by family, constant calamity. I remain unafraid because my God stays. He stays every time. In my falls, in my climbs, whatever the case. No matter what I face, He makes sure every time I'm thriving in His grace. My story foreshadows a greater one. Does it not remind you of God's only Son? He traded His identity and took form of a slave. And then on the cross, His life for us he gave. He resisted just as much, if not more, temptation, and was sentenced to death by false accusations. They associated lowliness with his Jewish reputation. He was warranted death with no hesitation. He came not for the Egyptian reality, but for the sake of love and our eternity. If not for Jesus, there's no other name under heaven in whom we can be saved.